Now then, Vinyl Monkey again for another one of my LPs ranked, this time by the brilliant British blues rock band, I suppose you could call them, Free. Paul Rodgers on vocals, Andy Fraser on bass, Paul Kossoff on lead guitar, Simon Kirk on drums, and their star shone brightly. Unfortunately, they formed in 1968 when incredibly Andy Fraser, the bass player who'd already played with John Mayall's Blues Breakers at this point, was only 15 years old, and the rest of the band were only 18 years old. And their first album came out a year later. I think the first time any of them had ever been in a studio. Unbelievably mature playing and songwriting, and yeah, just absolutely stunning band. But it was all over by, 1972, 73, early 73. They'd already split once in 1971, had a dust up. I'll maybe say something about that later, but they'd reformed, and anyway, within another album, or an album and a half really, the band had broken up. But what a band. So they only produced, I'm saying only, in that brief period they did produce 6 studio albums, most of the songs their own, nearly all of them their own, most of them penned by Paul Rodgers and Andy Fraser, yeah, six absolutely brilliant studio albums. And I've been listening to them very carefully, re-listening to them and re-listening, going through my usual methodology of scoring each track and everything else, and literally there's not a fag paper between these albums. It seems a bit harsh to be ranking them at all really, because they're all such strong albums. But anyway, that's what I'm going to do. That's what the title of this video is, the Free albums ranked. So I'm going to rank them from number 6 to 1 in my humble opinion, as usual. Hopefully might spark some debate and interest. What I'm not going to include is this brilliant album from 1971, Free Live. This was issued as a sort of stopgap really when they temporarily split up, and performed mainly in 2 venues, one in Sunderland and in where was he there? Croydon, and this does capture the band at its best, and some of their best tracks are on this album. And I was going to say, if anybody out there isn't familiar with the band Free and you wanted to get just one album, I mean, I would recommend get all 6, I really would. But if you really only wanted one album by Free, maybe this is the one to try, Free Live. But I'm not going to include that in my ranking. So without further ado, at number 6 from 1972 is Free at Last. And I'd already mentioned that Free had sort of temporarily split in 71. Paul Kossoff, lead guitarist, was suffering terribly addiction problems, drug addiction, increasingly finding it difficult to perform live or even to turn up in studios, and Andy Fraser particularly getting very frustrated with his decline, as it were. And but they reformed in late 71, 72, and produced this album Free at Last. But this was to be Andy Fraser's last album with Free. But what a great album. It's got the single Little Bit of Love, which I love. It's got Travelling Man, Catch a Train, Sail On, some great tracks. Why have I got it at number 6? I think possibly because the mix on this album, I mean, I've got to say with Free, I mean, the distinctive, sparse, minimalist, simple sort of sound where there's lots of space for each of the 4 performers to be heard and to play. It's maybe not mixed quite as well on this album for whatever reason. I don't know. And perhaps the sort of the production, it's just a little bit shrill, particularly Paul Rodgers, who plays quite a bit of piano on this album. It's just maybe a little bit harsh and shrill, and it doesn't sound quite as nice as some of the other albums. But again, really, really strong. Some brilliant tracks. My number 6 from 1972, Free at Last. My number 5, and I can't believe I've got this down at number 5. This is Free's debut album from 1969. When, as I say, when they started putting the songs together, they were aged between 15 and 18 years old. Absolutely ridiculous, really, when you listen to this. This is tons of sobs. It's got a really weird cover. I've never been able to work this one out. It's got sort of rabbits, and is it in a churchyard? Or there's a sort of jaguar or a cheetah or something over here. I really don't know what's going on there at all. But anyway, this is one of the great rock debut albums in my opinion. Absolutely fantastic, strong all the way through, beginning to end. It's bluesier, it's heavier than the other 5 Studio Free albums, I would say. You know, there's some sort of echoes of Zeppelin. I mean, these were contemporaries of early Zeppelin and Cream, and you can hear that sort of sound in there to a certain extent, which is missing. I mean, by the second album, they'd forged their own sort of unique space in, I don't know what you could even call it, blues rock, soul, blues soul rock. I don't know what you would call it, but this is an absolutely brilliant debut, and this is Kossoff demonstrating why he was one of the great blues rock guitarists as well. He's at his absolute best on here. It was apparently produced on a really low budget, 800 quid to produce the whole thing, just over a couple of days. And it's probably the better for that, and that's, I think it emphasises the sort of simple minimalist style, but and it includes the definitive cover of The Hunter, a great version of one of the few covers that Free do actually, but great album. My number 5, Tons of Sobs from 1969. My number 4, what an album this is. Sorry, the cover's got a bit damaged, but this is Heartbreaker. This is Free's last album. As I said, Andy Fraser left after Free at Last, and this album was recorded after that. Simon Kirke brought in a couple of his mates, Tetsu on bass and John Rabbit Bundrick on keyboards, and Paul Kossoff played on just over half, I think 5 of the tracks on this album. But it's just a great rock, pop, blues album. This is, the musicianship is absolutely superb, and Rodgers' vocals, which I've got to say are just consistently brilliant through all 6 albums. I mean, what a soul blues singer Paul Rodgers still is, actually. But this has got the brilliant single Wishing Well. It's got the title track Heartbreaker. I mentioned Kossoff only plays on 5 of them, but on a couple of these tracks he's absolutely stunning. I mean, it just, as I say, showcases that talent, and you know, what a shame he couldn't overcome those addictions and demons. But that's my number 4, that's Heartbreaker from 1972. My number 3 was Free's second album, and eponymous, when it's named Free, gatefold cover. After the weird first cover, I think they thought, and I mean, these first 2 albums weren't commercial successes. I think they were critically well received, but they certainly weren't commercial successes. That, I wonder whether the cover had something to do with that first one, that weird dark sort of cover that I could see that getting buried in the sort of record bins a little bit. It doesn't stand out, but so they've gone for the plain old naked woman for the second album, perhaps in a blatant attempt, I don't know, to to reach a wider audience. But anyway, this is free. This is it's got some absolutely brilliant Paul Kossoff licks. I mean, the opening track, I'll Be Creeping, which became a live favourite. Those guitar licks from Kossoff, they're not riffs, I think they're probably licks. Just delicate and absolutely gorgeous. And he repeats those that sort of style throughout this album. I think in the first two albums was Kossoff at his absolute best. And I think the other thing about this album, it's so slow. How slow can blues rock be? Well, this slow, but slow doesn't mean ponderous or anything like that. It's beautiful, it's spacious, it's minimalist, it's gorgeous stuff. That's free from 1969. So my number two, this is Highway from late 1970. This album, it wasn't well received after the album that preceded it. It didn't have any real hits on here. It's laid back, it's mellow. Occasionally you hear the odd country twinge in it, perhaps. It's reminiscent in some ways of that great band, The Band, and some of the stuff they were producing in that laid back sort of way. But it is just so consistent, and I think this is an album that really it shows a band that was just supremely confident, and they'd found their own style, and they were just sublime. And this one is so consistent from beginning to end, and it is the album, probably the free album, that I play the most, probably for that reason, that just beginning to end it is really mellow, beautiful, gorgeous. Highway from 1970, my number two, which leaves the number one, and this is from 1970 also. Earlier in 1970, this is Fire and Water, and this, I just think, it absolutely sums up and gives space to the four individuals that make up this band. I think if anybody, this is Andy Fraser's album. I mean, Rodgers is brilliant as usual, as he is across all 6 albums. Kossoff is perhaps gone into the background a little bit. He's perhaps struggling, but to the fore is Andy Fraser, and even to using the bass guitar as a sort of solo type instrument, as he does in the brilliant single All Right Now, and in my favourite track on the album, Mr. Big. So 7 tracks, all perfect, some absolute classics. Subtlety and shade and space and delicacy and sublime. So that's my number one. That's Freeze, Fire and Water from 1970. So thanks for listening. I'm hoping to get some more videos and some of my LPs, maybe ranked or maybe just highlighted, I don't know. But anyway, thanks for listening. Cheers.